According to the Pew Research Center, 56% of millennials are not getting married.
Do you believe in marriage?
No.
50.1% of women, for the first time in history, there are more childless women at 30 than there are women with children.
In my 20s, I would have said absolutely must have kids. I want them. At 30, I started questioning if that was just something that society's told me that I've wanted.
The greatest privilege that exists is having two loving parents.
I'm sitting here on the eve of 30, and I'm wondering if I'm gonna be just as lonely on the eve of 40.
Because when we're young, we're told and we're taught that it is happily ever after. That is where your happiness resides, in finding your prince and having a home and kids. And now we realize it's a trap. It is a trap.
The sacred institution of marriage, once an integral part of human society, has been crumbling for decades now. Just 20% of 25-year-olds have ever been married today versus 85% back in the 60s. But it's hardly surprising when millennials grew up being told that 50% of marriages end in divorce, combined with the fact that in today's day and age, there's minimal social, religious, and financial incentive to get married anyways. And that's how we found ourselves with a whole generation rejecting the chokehold that marriage had on North American culture. While some say that this abandonment of marriage is for the best, as traditional marriage offers a false promise of belonging and security that is better found elsewhere in non-traditional arrangements, others are arguing that marriage is a vital part of a functioning society. But what does this dismantling of the traditional family mean for us moving forward, and who loses the most if marriage becomes obsolete? Well, that's what I'm here to discuss with you today. One thing to look at when talking about the decline in a marriage is the impact that it has on community. While marriage may not be for everyone and it doesn't have the best track record, it does have a good history of bringing people together and encouraging you to be less self-focused. And there's actually data to show this to be the case. Married adults between the ages of 25 to 49 are far more likely to attend a community meeting, do local volunteer work, and visit a library. They talk to new people in their communities more often as well. Simply put, married people are more active participants in American civic life. Not only that, but marriage has been found to be good for the safety of communities. The positive effects of stable marriage and stable nuclear families spill over. Neighborhoods, towns, and cities are more likely to flourish when they are sustained by lots of married households. The work of the Harvard sociologist Robert Sampson tells us that neighborhoods with many two-parent families are much safer. In his words, family structure is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, predictor of variations in urban violence across cities in the United States. I found this very interesting, but also a bit surprising. I wouldn't have thought that married couples were more involved in communities than non-married people. I would just think that single people are more likely to reach out for social purposes, while married couples might hunker down more. This journalist tries to give an explanation, saying that committing to the institute of marriage reflects either a greater willingness or ability to make sacrifices for and partner with others. As well, it was found that married couples have been consistently more trusting of others than unmarried people. And that makes sense to me when thinking about the choice of getting married and taking on that group mindset and kind of needing to trust others a bit.
If you think about it, a lot of our society is becoming more individualistic. People do not have community with one another. People barely know their neighbors. People barely know anybody that is not within their close friend circle. We're becoming more separated from each other. We're losing the sense of community that we used to have. So of course, someone who is operating from an individualistic mindset is not going to consider your needs before their own. But if we had more of a community mindset, it would be more of, we have a person in our community that is clearly suffering or is clearly not in their best spirit. How can we do our best to make sure they get better?
Trying to speculate more on why this is, I wonder if married couples are more involved in communities because they're more reliant on them, and so there's more incentive to pour back into them. When we think of married couples versus singletons, I again think of a married couple being grounded in their community versus single people being more of that free bird kind of nature and not necessarily tied down to anything. Obviously a generalization. As well, married couples are more likely to have children, which means they're more reliant on community services like parks and libraries and healthcare and schooling, of course, and community centers with their versatility. So it would make sense that they would put more time and effort into supporting these services. But one thing is that these studies didn't specify the difference between married couples versus co-living couples. So it's hard to say from this data whether the outcomes are the same for both categories. I would assume that co-living couples have the same impacts on their communities because their values are the same. They're just living life without a contract. But the kicker is that we're not just seeing the rate of marriage go down, we're also seeing a rise in singleness. A new Pew Research Center analysis of census data finds that in 2019, roughly 4 in 10 adults ages 25 to 54 were unpartnered. That is, neither married nor living with a partner. This share is up sharply from 29% in 1990. Men are now more likely than women to be unpartnered, which wasn't the case 30 years ago. In this video, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds of why people are staying single. That seems like its own video. But briefly, some of the reasons include the feminist movement, of course, allowing women to be more self-sufficient and not needing marriage. With that, being married used to be an economic necessity for women, and that's not the case anymore. The decrease in religious affiliations mean that incentive isn't there anymore either. And then you could go down the whole rabbit hole of AI, how AI girlfriends are replacing actual girlfriends.
We're now finding out that over 10 million people think a relationship with another human is overrated.
But I don't really want to go there. But no matter the reason, the decrease in marriage is showing that it might have some detrimental effects on community support when the typical single person doesn't have as much incentive to pour back into the people around them. Before moving on, this portion of today's video is sponsored by RocketMoney. Do you guys ever have the problem where you sign up for subscriptions or trials and then end up not actually using them and forget that you're subscribed and then get paranoid about whether or not you canceled them? I get this all the time, whether it's streaming services, an app I was trying out, or especially with work, I'll sign up to a lot of article websites to get access to articles I want to use for these videos. And then I never end up using those sites again, but I'm still paying monthly to get access to things I'm not using. Very stressful. But even if you do remember to cancel them, some of these companies make it so complicated to cancel. The worst is when they make you call to cancel because they're just trying to pull more money out of you, knowing that you'll delay it because you can't find the time to make the phone call just to cancel the subscription. I can't stand it when they do that. But if you also deal with these problems and you're looking for a way to simplify your financial life, then RocketMoney's for you. RocketMoney is a free to download personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and overall manage your money better. The way it works is it safely and securely connects to your bank account, and with that you can manage all of your subscriptions in one place. And the best part being that you can cancel any subscription that's been haunting you with just a few taps. Another amazing feature is that if you upload a photo of your bills to the app, RocketMoney will actually negotiate those bills for you, trying to get you a better price. Anything from internet services to cable and phone bills. RocketMoney has helped people save over $740 a year using all of their features, with over $5 million in canceled subscriptions. So if you would like to join in and save some money, go to rocketmoney.com/embers, or you can just click the link in the description to get started for free. Thank you so much to RocketMoney for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to the decline in marriage. Now, with there being a rise in singleness, people are needing to make up for the resources that are lost from not being connected to their community. And this is where technology comes in to make up for those lost connections. These technological advances allow more self-sufficiency, where now with the press of a button, you can buy your support. Think of food delivery services, online grocery orders, Amazon delivering anything and everything to your front door, self-driving cars, and robot cleaners. The list goes on. Point being, with enough money, you can buy your community.
I feel like with modern technology, so many of us are starved for genuine human connection, and we're really quite lonely. And that's why so many of us spend hours a day watching strangers on a screen talk to us in a seemingly very genuine way to create the illusion that we're, I don't know, laying in bed next to them. And it fills this need that we have for human connection, but really we're not connecting with anyone. Really, we're just one stranger talking into a screen while another stranger watches that person on their screen. Seems kind of up, doesn't it? Kind of dystopian. I don't know. Oh, well, good night.
We also have to get back to the biggest player in the game, which is AI, which can basically become your personal assistant, creating meal plans, giving restaurant recommendations, and creating budgets. But to clarify, this is of course not the case for everyone. Just because you're single doesn't mean you hate everyone and want to self-isolate. And it's not like every single person just cuts themselves off from their community because they don't want to invest in the playgrounds. These technologies just make it possible for the people who do want to do that to easily withdraw from others. And this brings me to the topic of the nuclear family's impact on the loneliness epidemic. I've talked about the loneliness epidemic in a previous video, but when looking into the decrease in marriage, I began to wonder if it also had impacts on our culture of loneliness. In that video, I talk about how capitalism kind of forces us into creating the nuclear family, and in doing so, isolating ourselves from the community around us. So that leads me to believe that by reducing the people in nuclear families, they would be more community focused. And then the question is the degradation of the nuclear family really that bad if it's what's isolating us?
The past 100 years, the nuclear family model was created for political reasons, and it was heavily subsidized. It was not necessarily natural. We lived in villages, communities, we helped each other out. We didn't live in suburban sprawls where we can't even knock on our neighbor's door and ask for help.
But I think these are two separate issues, because the nuclear family is problematic in its own way of isolating married couples. And the research I've been referencing says that while these couples are more involved in their communities, they are in fact less social. A perfect example of this is this study that says single parents, both divorced and never married, are more likely than married parents to socialize regularly with their neighbors. Childless, never married adults, perhaps unsurprisingly, are most likely to spend several social evenings with neighbors each month. But this makes sense when you don't have immediate family there to socialize with in your day-to-day. You're going to reach out to others to get that same support. This journalist states that the nuclear family has been crumbling in slow motion for decades. He sees extended families and what he calls forged families, single parents, single adults, and others coming together to support one another and children as filling the vacuum created by the breakdown of the nuclear family. I think what we can pull from this is the trend of singleness and self-isolation can have a negative impact on society, but the decline of the family unit isn't necessarily that bad. To try and summarize this section, because I feel like it's a little bit nuanced, married couples are more invested in building up the community they live in and provide support, while unpartnered people are more likely to be socially involved in their communities. One of the biggest impacts the decrease of marriage has is on the children. While the standard American life used to have the family structure of a man and a woman who are married and they have 2.5 kids, there are now different ways to form a family, one of them being single-parent households. The 2021 census tells us that 60% of kids are growing up in families with married parents, but that's down from 73% in the late 1990s. While many people will continue to have kids whether or not they're married, we're seeing that marital status does have an impact on children's success in life. I learned about this topic from the book The Two-Parent Privilege by Melissa Kearney, How Americans Stopped Getting Married and Started Falling Behind. And in this book, she states that the decline in marriage and the corresponding rise in the share of children being raised in one-parent homes has contributed to the economic insecurity of American families, has widened the gap in opportunities and outcomes for children from different backgrounds, and today poses economic and social challenges that we cannot afford to ignore, but may not be able to reverse. I'll put this right here. Now that is a big statement, so let's try and break it down. There are some obvious perks to being raised in a two-parent household, one of them being financial stability, whether that's a home where both parents work or one income is enough to sustain the family, so the other parent stays home. But the privilege of two parents goes deeper than household incomes. Two parents with healthy relationships with their children are able to offer more emotional bandwidth, more time to invest in the children, and a larger network of people to pull from. It makes sense that pooling resources from two parents means more opportunities than one has alone. A second parent means another adult to read to the children, to take them to extracurricular activities, and to help them with their homework. Arguably more important, it's another shoulder to cry on, it's another listening ear, and another voice of wisdom in trying times.
Having two parents is a form of generational wealth, and I think about this often, especially with a family dynamic and extended family, where a lot of the people in my life, I would argue from my family dynamic, did not have a strong sense of self. They did not have hobbies, they did not have individualized experiences, especially if you come from a divorced household or you have a parent die when you're young. You are down a person. They have less resources to offer you, and therefore you are competing in the world at large with people who have had two parents, whose parents stayed together, whose parents had hobbies, whose parents had interests, whose parents had networks. Having a system set in place where you're able to access the grander part of the world.
It's no secret that raising children is both physically and emotionally exhausting, even for two parents. And when that full responsibility is on only one parent, often something has to give. And that could look like not having enough emotional energy for your child, not being able to do those extracurricular activities, or just not having the financial ability to give your child the opportunities to get ahead in the world. When a child is raised in a single parent home, the parent is often run dry from trying to balance the full load of caring for the child's physical needs, caring for the home, and on top of that, working full time.
The worst feeling as a single mom is doing everything in your capacity to raise your children by yourself, and either still being told that it's not enough, or you just feel like it's not enough. I feel like people look at me and see me raising my kids and just automatically expect me to be like three people. Like, my children literally do not have a father. They have a biological father. Yes, he's alive, but he is not present at all whatsoever. He does not help at all. He doesn't help with the decision making. He doesn't share the time. He doesn't share the pickups. He doesn't go to the doctor's appointments. He does nothing. I do it all by myself. I make so many sacrifices every day. I have to give up going and chaperoning my kids' field trips because I have to be at work to pay the bills. I don't get to stay home with my kids on digital learning days and help my kids educate themselves. When I'm not feeling good, I don't get to take the day off. I don't know, I guess sometimes I get tired of people looking at me like I'm this superwoman and like I got this and I'm expected to have it, and like I don't want to be superwoman. I'm tired. Just hoping that one day, like, I catch a break.
Two-parent households also benefit from having that extra little bit of time where the parents can invest back into themselves and then pass down those improvements onto their children. Think of parents who have more time to be physically active. Those habits have been found to be passed on to their children. With that extra time, they're also able to continually build that network of community, which expands the resources they can offer their kids.
If you're a single mom and you have your child 100% by yourself, financially, physically, everything by yourself, the most important thing that you can do is work on yourself. You are not going to be able to find time to do it. You are going to have to make the time. Making the time for yourself to be better, to be the best version of yourself, is going to positively impact your child because you're all they have.
And this isn't all to say that there should be a punishment for having the privilege of two parents. It's just a fact that there are advantages over others who didn't have two parents in their household. On the note of money, though, marriage does play a big part in the financial well-being of children and is one of the best prevention methods against poverty for the family.
Basically, states with more married parents see markedly higher growth rates than other states that don't have as many married parents, have much lower rates of child poverty, and also have higher rates of what we call economic mobility. That's a sort of rags to riches mobility over the life course for kids growing up in those states. So these are kind of just some examples of the way in which how when families are flourishing, both kids and adults are more likely to be flourishing as well.
Marriage remains America's strongest anti-poverty, anti-crime, pro-health institution. It's an undeniable fact that the best chances for financial success, emotional well-being, and good health for both parents and children happen when parents are married and families are intact. Marriage reduces the probability of child poverty by 80%. This article goes into the importance of improving marriage rates in the battle of poverty, saying women and children in single-parent households are at particular risk for living in poverty, and indeed family earnings for half of the nation's children have been falling over time. Rather than focusing on changing values, a more effective approach to addressing both poverty and marriage may be to improve economic opportunities for all Americans, particularly for low-skilled, less educated workers. I feel like in a lot of ways this news isn't surprising, but definitely important to note, because of course there's less income overall if you're comparing two working parents to one, but there's also a higher likelihood of getting stuck in a job that isn't serving your family anymore when you're the only one bringing in an income. When there isn't that backup of a second income, you have less flexibility to switch careers, which in the end could increase your salary. And we see this in the data of rates of class mobility within single mother families. The fraction of children with single parents in a given community is the strongest and most robust predictor of economic mobility, or its absence. Children raised in communities with high percentages of single mothers are less likely to move up. In other words, it takes a village, but of married people, to raise the odds that a poor child will have a shot at the American dream. And this isn't just applicable to families where one partner up and left. Even when both parents are still involved in their children's lives, they still don't have as much to offer the kids. In a marriage, both parties take on the responsibility of running the household and taking care of the kids. And doing it together is, of course, more efficient than doing it separately. When couples separate, they have to take care of 2 homes, which is more work than taking care of one. And that, of course, takes up more of the time that they could be pouring into resources to build up their children. And the unfortunate thing is that unpartnered mothers are typically not making up for the loss of that second parent in the household. 67% of children living in an unpartnered mother household have no adult living with them besides their mother. But this is, of course, at no fault to the mother. Even myself, in a married household, I would love to have another adult around to help clean up the place a little bit, but it's not as easy as just magically making it happen. But the good news is that despite this, mothers are still able to compensate for the lost person in the house if they build a network of resources to help with the parental load. For example, having grandparents or even just other members of the community step in can help provide the missing emotional and financial benefits for the children. In this article, the writer compared the relationship between the health of the American dream and the presence of 2-parent families in the community. Working with a team of scholars, they found that Black boys are more likely to achieve upward economic mobility if there are more Black fathers in the neighborhood, and more married couples as well. As we know, though, this downward trend in marriage is not just from divorces or people not finding the one, but of the cultural trend of co-living with your partner. And it's understandable. In an age where you don't have any external incentive to get married, why go through the trouble?
Why do you think less people are getting married?
Well, so we're not married. We've been together 25 years, we're not married.
That's quite interesting. So how come you guys didn't decide to get married?
Never seemed very necessary. I think we haven't had children. If we'd had children, I think probably then we would have done.
Yeah.
But we didn't. And we were just perfectly happy as we were, so why... if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
But unfortunately, as studies are finding, co-living relationships don't last as long as married relationships. In the 2-parent privilege, they say cohabitation in theory could deliver similar resources as marriage, but the data show that in the US, these partnerships are not, on average, as stable as marriages. And this study reinforces it, saying a new survey of 11 developed countries shows that large shares of cohabiting couples with children under the age of 18 doubt that their current relationship will last, especially in comparison to married parents. Moreover, cohabiting parents in most countries are less likely than married parents to see their relationship as a vital part of their life. That is, of course, not to say that all co-living partnerships are doomed to fail, but overall, it's less guaranteed depending on the situation. I think one of the reasons for this is that when you decide to co-live but commit to the long-term relationship, you haven't left the category of just co-living, despite having the same commitment as married couples. So there's not a label transition to separate you from the other people co-living and still trying out the relationship. For some, the co-living stage of a relationship is just that, a stage, and the hope may be that it will go on to marriage, but that doesn't always happen. And we see this again in the data that among currently married US adults ages 18 to 50, about 64% have lived with their spouse before getting married. So it's hard to know what percentage of co-living couples have made it to that point of full commitment versus the ones who are still just dating. But there is, of course, that group of people who choose not to get married, not to stick it to the man, but because maybe they don't feel as confident in their relationship. And that could result in the co-living parents being a less stable environment for children. Overall, I think it's unfair to come to the conclusion that co-living married couples have a less stable home for children than married couples, because we don't have all the data to really show that. One thing to note though is that the rise in children coming from co-living but unmarried couples does not match up with the amount of children coming from unmarried parents overall. In fact, most unmarried parents today are not in relationships that are essentially marriage in all but the name. Among children living with unmarried adults, nearly 9 out of 10 live with 2 biological parents. Among children living with unmarried cohabiting adults, the share living with 2 biological parents is between 1/2 and 3/4. In other words, the share of children living with 2 biological but unmarried parents is smaller than we might have thought. And so from that, we're seeing that the problem we're dealing with is not from couples who choose to have children outside the contract of marriage, but from the rise of children living with one parent. Overall, 21% of American children live in a home with a mother who is neither married nor cohabiting. In comparison, only 8% of children live with either unmarried parents or a parent and an unmarried partner. A couple things I want to note before we move on. One of them being, of course, there are exceptions to this situation. Families with unhealthy relationships are included from these findings of 2-parent households being better, as any house with an abusive parent will always be better off without that person in the house. I also want to clarify that this segment isn't to shame single mothers or make them feel less than. They're obviously working very hard to do the best they can for their kids. It's just a matter of fact that there's only so much you can do when you're raising your kids on your own. I am well versed in the world of single mothers, and I know for a fact that it's not a death sentence. But it's just important to note that there is a difference and a privilege involved with having 2 parents in the household. Children can definitely still succeed coming out of those single parent households. They just have to work harder to get those resources that were already available to their peers that had 2 parents. And now we move on to the problem of fertility rates plummeting in pretty much every developed country. The general fertility rate in the United States decreased by 3% from 2022, reaching a historic low. This marks the 2nd consecutive year of decline, following a brief 1% increase from 2020 to 2021. From 2014 to 2020, the rate consistently decreased by 2% annually. The cycle of birth rates usually follows the pattern of falling during economic downturns and then rebounding during economic recovery. But that changed when we hit the 2008 recession. As expected, during this recession, birth rates dropped as people weren't feeling financially stable, but it didn't recover like after previous recessions. Instead, birth rates have continued to drop ever since. There are many factors contributing to this drop in birth rates, some being the cost of raising children going up and the increase of women focusing on careers. And the aspect we're narrowing in on, of course, is the impact from fewer marriages. Now, if this decrease in marriage was just coming from couples choosing to co-live instead of getting married, we would expect that there wouldn't be a change in birth rates. But what we're finding is that there still is a correlation between decreased marriage and lower fertility. We see in this study that women who don't marry are less likely to meet their fertility goals. The reality is most women in this birth cohort, 1980 to 1985, are well behind where they need to be to hit their fertility goals by the end of their reproductive years. For over 40% of women in this survey, they would need to reliably have more than double the recent observed age-specific birth rates to meet their fertility expectations. That's not likely to happen. One reason for this could be that women want that security of marriage before moving forward to have children. So if the ring isn't there, they'll put it off. It's also common for women to not see themselves as mothers until they meet a spouse that they actually want to have kids with.
Can I ask a question about kids?
Yeah.
What's your feelings on them?
In my 20s, I would have said, absolutely must have kids. I want them. At 30, I started questioning if that was just something that society's told me that I've wanted. There's not a lot of men I meet that I think they'd be great fathers. And so I kind of don't have that instinct to like procreate with them because I'm like, oh, I don't know if this would be an equal parenting relationship.
But the biggest factor is the trend of delaying marriage. This impacts the amount of children women are having, as when they get married later, their window of fertility gets narrower. The graph above shows that women who spent fewer of their reproductive years married tended to have a bigger shortfall in births versus expectations. We also know that it's become more and more common for women in their 30s to start having children, which is great. We love seeing women getting their footing in the world and accomplishing all their dreams before settling into parenthood. But what I still found surprising was that in 2019, nearly half of all births in the US were to women 30 or older. Still, we know that the increase in births from women in their 30s doesn't make up for the loss, as Melissa says in her book again. I feel like I should take this down now because the whole video isn't about it. But she says that the additional number of births from women in their 30s is still smaller than the reduced number of births to women below the age of 30, making the overall birth rate lower than in previous decades.
Talk about having kids in your 30s or later. So like many millennial, I have been spending the last decade building my career, waiting for the perfect time. I actually didn't know if I wanted kids until about 4 years ago, but I still wanted to wait until I was 100% ready, not just financially, but like emotionally, mentally, everything. Now I'm 3 months from being 36 and I worried, did I freaking wait too long? It doesn't help hearing that 1 in 8 couples have a hard time having kids, and every doctor is like, you better get started. I finally feel ready, but I also worry, did I wait too long?
If we once again narrow in on the group of co-living parents and their trend in child rearing, like we've said, it's on its way up. This is of course because of the increased normalization of non-married couples having children together. But this doesn't mean that we're having a baby boom of children coming from co-living parents. It's just that with this normalization of couples denying traditional marriage values, the people who in previous generations would have gotten married to have kids are now just not getting married but still having the kids. And so it again does not make up for the drop off of births from married couples. Once again, because we're seeing that rise in unpartnered mothers. And so as it turns out, not being married is closely associated with women not achieving their fertility expectations or desires. Cohabitation is not an equivalent substitute for marriage where fertility is concerned. Taking all of this into account, knowing that just 14% of single people are looking for a serious relationship, the increase in having children later in life is decreasing the amount of children people are having, and co-living parents not making up for those losses in births, means that overall, less marriage results in less children. Okay, final thoughts. For one, I don't want this to come across like a promotion for the traditional stay-at-home wife and breadwinner husband combo. That's not the point of this. And we know from history that that isn't even the solution, because during the times when we had the greatest percentage of people getting married, a lot of them were unhappy. In my opinion, it's better to have a lower marriage rate than a higher divorce rate. But I do still find it interesting how much marriage is incorporated into society, and because of that, there aren't as many support systems for single people. This section on the two-parent privilege was really interesting to me, and I came out of it seeing the importance of not necessarily staying in a marriage that you're unhappy with just for the sake of the kids, but rather the importance of recognizing the challenges of single parenting and being mindful of how to compensate for them. Also, just because the data says that married couples are more involved in communities doesn't mean that we'll have no community involvement if marriage continues to be on the decline. I think the bigger problem in this issue is that we live in a society that continually encourages people to self-isolate, and with that we don't have enough ways to actually stay connected with people besides on our phones. Definitely see my loneliness epidemic video if you want more on that. Also, while you're at it, if you liked this video, I would highly encourage you to take a second to subscribe, because I only put out one of these video essays every month, so if you're not subscribed, you might miss it. But my last thought on the matter being that if we live in a society that will potentially collapse if not enough people get married, maybe we have more of a problem with the way we're running things and less of a problem with people's choices in their love lives. But that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video essay, and I'll catch you next month for another one. Bye!